Okay, today we're going to talk a little bit about cylinders and the piping system. We need a system to deliver the oxygen and the other medical gases we've been talking about to the various portions of the hospital. So basically for our gases, we can transport them in metal cylinders. These are your cylinders that we are going to talk about. Your liquid oxygen is stored in bulk liquid storage. The storage for liquid oxygen is designed like a thermos bottle. It has to be kept cold because once it warms up, it then becomes a gas. Some of the regulating agencies that we deal with are the Food and Drug Administration. They're the ones responsible for the purity of your gases. Department of Transportation, they're the guys who oversee the production of your cylinders. OSHA and EPA for safety reasons and the health of the workers who take care of these gases. Cylinders, if you remember, have been around since 1888, and George Barth is the gentleman who, in fact, founded them. Prior to 1970, it was the Interstate Commerce Commission, and after 1970, the Department of Transportation took over. Other agencies you're going to deal with, National Fire Protection Agency, which makes sense because if these things explode, they can cause a fire. Compressed Gas Association, these are the folks who have come up with our safety systems for us to make sure that we're not going to have problems, hopefully not interchange and put the wrong cylinder valves and stems on our gases and cause problems with our patients. One of the things that we have with cylinders are good manufacturing practices. You need to follow those. If you don't follow those and something happens, you're most likely to lose that lawsuit that people are going to bring against you. So cylinders can either be spun or they can be stamped into their cylinder shape. It's interesting when you're reading a cylinder, sometimes you'll see the word spun on there so you know exactly how it was made. We have steel cylinders. These are your 3A, your 3AA. Here's the chromobidium. It's a steel alloy. Aluminum 3Al is another one. Why do we have aluminum cylinders? Basically, you need these for your MRI, your places like that where you can't have metal. They work out fairly well, plus they are light, so they're easy to move. The lightest there was the carbon fiber. These guys actually have a fill to about 3,000 psi. We don't see that many in the hospitals. If you scuba dive or something like that, you'll see the carbon fiber cylinders are being used because of their lightness. So there it is. As you can see, the top is threaded, fitted with a valve stem. The bottom is welded closed. Most of your cylinders, except for your aluminum ones and the carbon fiber, they have their own specialty as far as that goes. Should be capable of holding 10% more filling pressure than the service pressure. And we'll see the service pressure on the cylinder itself. The Bureau of Explosives requires that each of these cylinders have a pressure relief mechanism. The cylinders get hot. If they get hot, you have to release the gas. You have your frangible disc, your fusible plug, a spring-loaded one that we also release valve we have on the larger cylinders. With a frangible disc or fusible plug, if those have been melted or released, the gas is going out. There is no saving any of that gas. With a spring-loaded one, it'll actually go out, release the pressure, then come back, so you still will have some of that gas still remaining. So one of the things we do, not us, but has to happen, is your cylinders need to be hydrostatically checked every 5 to 10 years. What we're looking when we do this is, can the cylinder expand? If the cylinder is expanding and has expanded its entire life and continues to expand the same width or expansion, then the cylinder's in pretty good shape. If the cylinder doesn't expand or the cylinder expands too much, then that cylinder has to go to cylinder heaven. It can't be used anymore. There could be some corrosion, there could be some other problems with it at that point in time, but we definitely don't want to be using it for putting gas into it. The cylinder is filled with water to 5/3 of its working pressure, and then on the cylinders you will see it'll say for example 17.5 cc. That is your cylinder expansion, or EE rather. That's your cylinder expansion that's noted on the cylinder for you. Carbon fibers have their own unique quality, and they have different testing requirements. They have a life, and it's interesting when you read some of the information on them that they're good for about 15 years or so. We use the metal cylinders as long as they last. We've had in the lab on occasions some of them that were back in 1955. They look like they're pretty beaten up. They have some rust on them. They have some dings, minor dings on them, things like that. They still hold their shape. They still do the things that they need to do. And there it is. All cylinders have, except for the carbon fiber, have to go to be tested every 5 years. However, if there's a star following the testing date, then you can test it every 10 years. That's not a problem. Now, the thing to remember about this is this. Say that your cylinder was tested in 2010. It has a star on it, so it's going to be tested sometime this year in 2020. What that doesn't mean is that when 2020 comes to an end and the cylinder hasn't been tested, that we'll empty out the gas and test it. We're not going to do that. What they're going to do is they're going to use the cylinder, and so we go ahead and it's delivered in February of 2021. Once the gas has been used, then the cylinder will go in and be retested at that particular point. So that 10 years means it's going to be 10 years waiting for the testing date. However, if it still has gas in it and it's still doing what it needs to, we'll use it, the cylinder and the gas, until it's empty at that particular point. The other thing is that your cylinders will sometimes have the star, and then when you're reading the testing information, you'll find out that maybe there was an inspection, a 10-year inspection in 1985, say for example, and there's no star behind it. And that means that, again, has to be tested in 5 years then, not 10 years. But say it was tested, in fact, in 1990 at this particular point, which was your 5 years, and this time it does have a star. We really don't know what happened to the cylinder, why it lost its star, and we don't know why it got the star back. It's just one of those things that's kind of interesting. Cylinders are pretty well traded around, so it's not necessarily the same people who did the initial testing or did the testing back in 1985 still have the cylinders in 1990. Interesting. Aluminum cylinders every 5 years. And there you can see a picture of the water bath. And there it is. The pressure causes cylinder expansion, water displacement, as you can see with that. And there you get your elastic expansion at that particular point. Think about this too. Athletes who don't have very much body fat, if you're trying to figure out, how much they do or what's going on to them, they immerse them in cylinder baths also, and they look at how much water's been displaced. Kind of an interesting testing for them too. So just a little bit of information. You can see what they do with these, how to take care of them. Doesn't mean much except just to show that to you. The other thing is, though, we're going to look for external examination. Last thing you want to do is take a cylinder in and find out it has oil or grease on it, especially if it's a medical gas cylinder. You got to sort of wonder, where was it and what were people doing for it, okay? If it's been in a fire and it's expanding and where it's not supposed to, these things do find their way to cylinder heaven, and we never see them again. The other thing, as you can see, vendor blowing down, drain it out. We're going to go ahead and put something in it. One of the things that the FDA tried to do at one time was to designate a certain number of cylinders that just for medical gases, and that's all it would be used for. And the cylinder folks came back and told the FDA, no, there's not enough deaths, shall we say, it would justify us having to do that. So they still haven't done that at all. So this medical gas cylinder could now hold something like argon or freon or something else. And then the next time may be cleaned out and have everything else done to it and hold oxygen. So you always want to make sure that those cylinders have been emptied out if you're going to work in that part of the field. You have your odor, your sniff test, okay? You want to see is there something in there that doesn't smell right. However, if this cylinder, as you can see, is carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, or any of the anesthetic gases, we're not going to do the odor or sniff test. This is something that came out with the FDA. They report things about injuries that happened to patients. You can see some of this. This was freon, 14, and benzene that were in the high pressure cylinders that were contaminating the medical gases. So it's really important that that not happen. Then they're going to do the hammer or dead ring test, and I've decided when I retired, that's the job I want. I can go around with a hammer and hit the cylinders. If they have a nice clear ding, 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 then I know they're okay. If not, and they have a thud, 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 then unfortunately they do go to cylinder heaven at this particular point in time. And like I said, you don't want to do these on aluminum cylinders because it's kind of hard to use super glue to put them back together. Most places aren't going to let you do that. One of the things too is the labels. You're going to see this again, and I'm just going to bring it up here. If you're going to say take a green cylinder and make it gray for CO2, all the labels have to come off. It's not like your car. Remember with your car, they tell you just clean it and stick it on top of the old one. This doesn't happen here. The old labels, where anything like that has to come off of the cylinders, and then the new ones placed on the cylinder. Plus, they sometimes have like little grocery tags that they put on there. If those things are loose or falling off, you cannot use that cylinder. Everything has to be on there nice and tight and make sure that all the parts and pieces are there. And so, you know, once you see that happen a couple times, you call the distributor and tell them you need to come get these cylinders. You need to bring me some new ones that everything is where it's supposed to be. And then the valve, you want to make sure it's the right valve. There's been cases where people have been delivering gases. They hadn't had their CGA training. And I remember one was in a nursing home. They took the oxygen valve off of the cylinder and put it on an argon cylinder. And then they used argon to pump into the nursing home. And about 3 or 4 people actually ended up dying as a result of that. So you always need to check and make sure that whatever the cylinder is, you can take and make sure that the right correct CGA valve is on it at that particular point. And then if there's any corrosion, any rust, anything like that, to where there's going to be a problem, especially with leaks or something like that, then unfortunately that valve can't be reused. Now, the correct color is what the industry uses to make sure green is green in the United States. That's oxygen. Internationally, oxygen is white. And so you need to know if your cousin from Canada is coming to visit and they bring their white cylinders, take a look at it, make sure that it says oxygen on the label. That's how you determine if you have the right cylinder. People go, yeah, but green is oxygen. Everything that has green on it has to be oxygen. No, it would be nice to think that, but that's really not what's going to go on at that point. So what we need to do is you can look at the color, you can find it. It's green, that should be oxygen, but you have to read that label. Once you've read that label, then you know whether or not you have the right cylinder. There you see the different colors. Oxygen, like I said, in the US is green. Internationally, it's white. You will see white cylinders in your labs. Some of our lab gases are white, and they'll have the different mixtures for the PFTs and things like that, too. The mixtures, for example, you see helium is brown. If you have a cylinder of heliox, you have green on the shoulder and then you have brown for the rest of it, and that tells you that's a mixture of oxygen and helium, and that's your heliox. It doesn't tell you if it's a 10 or 20 or 70 or 80 or 80, 20, whatever it is, but it does tell you that, in fact, that is heliox. One of the things, too, and I want to mention it here, a lot of times heliox will get delivered to the hospital and people go, we can just use it. It's already been mixed. We don't have to worry about it. You sometimes want to have that little bit of paranoia with you. Has that gas separated? It may not happen that often. People will tell you I've never heard of it separating, but there have been cases where maybe one or two did separate. And what you need to figure out is, okay, well, what do we want to test for? We want to analyze the gas. Well, if you have a heliox cylinder, you can use an oxygen analyzer because you should have oxygen in there. And if the analyzer comes back reading 0, you know that the gas is separated. If you use the helium, then you should get 100% helium. That also tell you that you got a problem with it at that point. So there you see it, the labels. Got to take them off if they're not any good. You have to have the right label on, okay? And you cannot use it like your car. These are just showing some of the different sizes. And if you look closely, you'll notice that the AA to the E have a different valve stem than you're going to see with G and H. And then we're going to talk about those shortly. So the markings are either stamped or engraved. They're your plus means 10% above service pressure. The star means 10-year inspection at that particular point. You will find neither of those on an aluminum cylinder. If you do, be kind of curious as to how that got on there, because it shouldn't be there at all. And these are the markings, as you can see, how nice and neat, made in the USA. You can see the 3 with the little thing in the middle, 82, and then you see the plus and the star. That little squiggly in the middle of the 3 and 82 is the inspector's mark. So if something happens to this cylinder and they get this 3 and the little squiggly with the 82, they know who the inspector of that cylinder was, and they can go back and talk with them. And there you see DOT, Department of Transportation, 3AA, there's your chromobidium. 2015 is the service pressure. Because of that plus, when we hook up a regulator or reducing valve, we're going to see most likely 2200 PSI, okay? Doesn't necessarily mean the manufacturer or the people who are supplying this to you are going to do that, but at least you know that you have the ability to have that 2200. And there you see the serial number and then the owner's stamp, okay? Other ones, we just talked about, these are the different ones for DOT, the type where you can have them. This is the reason why in the MRI suite you don't want to carry no metal with you. The unfortunate, there was probably about 5 or 6 years ago a story that came out of New York. This young child, about 10 years old, was put in the MRI suite. They had an oxygen cylinder that was not aluminum in the room. They turned on the magnet and it went through the MRI device and unfortunately killed the child on its trip to the magnet. So this is just another one showing you the different dates, and they're so pretty. I just love them when I look at the pictures. When you look at them on the cylinders themselves, they're not lined up like this. They're a little bit around everywhere, so you can actually learn how to read a cylinder. Filling, you're not going to fill, but maybe if they're filling in your hospital because the people have the CGA training, you may want to watch and see what they do. The 2 most common methods, going from liquid to gas. You do have to have a vaporizer or a heat exchanger to turn that liquid into a gas. The gas to gas, you're going to do the heat of compression checking. You're going to make sure that you can touch the cylinder. There's a maximum temperature you can reach. If you get there too quickly, then you will definitely have problems with the cylinder. You want it warm, but you don't want it hot. This is just a picture of a manifold. That's how they normally do the refilling. And you have to have good manufacturing practices. Here it is. You have to be trained. Your equipment has to be certified. The FDA comes around about every 2 years. They check your books to make sure that whatever you're doing is done appropriately. If you have an accident, they're going to be there to visit you in less than 2 years. If you have the wrong gas and somebody unfortunately dies as a result of it, they're going to be there also to check and see what's going on. You have to make sure your cylinders are clean and safe. You got to make sure that you know the lot this gas is coming from. And you know, it's hard to think about it. You're going, well, you know, this is a medical gas. It should be out there purified 99% at least, and everything should work. How can a gas get contaminated? How does anything happen? It could be just one little slip. It could be something else that's going on. It could be bad air. It could be anything. So you always need to be able to identify where did that gas come from. And so things that you do, you have to do your pre-fill, you have to do your filling, you have to do your post, and then you have to document. Just in case you're wondering if it has to be documented, it does have to be documented. Okay? And it has to state that your equipment's calibrated and everything is as it should be. You can see the fill rate is less than 200 psi per minute. Temperature is basically 70 degrees, and it has to remain less than 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So liquid gas has a different way of being filled. It's called filling density, and sometimes people have a hard time understanding what are you talking about. Well, filling density basically is this. We're going to go ahead and take this cylinder, we're going to fill it with water. Now we know how much the cylinder weighs, and then what we're going to do is we're going to empty all that out, make sure there's no water in it, and we're going to put the liquid gas in it up to the weight that the cylinder was when it was filled with water. And CO2 and nitrous are the two that can be stored as liquids. And CO2 is like 69%, nitrous around the same area at that particular point. And that's all that goes into that cylinder. You cannot fill it up to the top, okay? So that's one of the things you need to remember. It's a ratio between the weight of the gas compared to what the weight of the cylinder was when it was filled with 100% water. And there's your labels. They have to have hazards on them, precautionary statements. If this falls over and the cylinder valve breaks off, then you need to leave the area. If you remember, I told you you have to leave for at least 15 minutes. Don't be walking on the carpet or anything at that particular point. If there is exposure, who do you have to contact? And what do you have to do if you're a recipient of it? You know, that's one thing you don't want to do because gases are cold. And then it also has the purity on it. And this is a label. This is just one that talks about it. It's from Puerto Rico at this particular point. Doesn't matter if it's Puerto Rico or the United States. If you look at this, you can see there's a little RX up there because this is a medical gas. It does require a physician's order. Okay. Sometimes that label, just going back for a moment, will also tell you how the gas was made. And it would put fractional distillation or air purification, liquefaction, things like that too. So you can find out how that gas was made. So cylinder valves, they control the contents. We don't want to release the content until we're ready to do so. And it has all this body, chrome-plated brass body, threaded inlet connectors. These are where our safety systems come into play, in a stem that opens either by a hand wheel or a handle. There's the little handle. You have a little, what we call a key. The key is able to fit over the end of that little handle, and you can turn with it. Keys are one of those things that they have a tendency to disappear. So if you have a key, make sure you hang on to it, especially if it's metal or something like that. Don't put it down because unfortunately it will disappear and disappear quite rapidly, unfortunately. So it has the outlet for attaching our regulators, pressure reducing valves. They have a pressure relief valve on it. You know, you don't want that cylinder to blow up. I'd rather lose the gas than lose the cylinder and the people around it too. And then you have direct acting valves. These are high pressure, as you can see, greater than 1500 psi. And then the diaphragm valves are low pressure, less than 1500 psi. This one just shows you a direct acting one. You got some Teflon to prevent leakage at that particular point. And what you do is turn the threads and the gas goes in, the gas goes out. And then this is a handle one, a diaphragm one. A little bit more with this one than the other ones. A little bit more can go wrong with it. Anytime you have a lot more pieces, there's more that can happen with it. And this one also has the pressure relief valve. There's the spring-loaded one if you're looking at it. So there they are, frangible disc or fusible plug, and those are on our small cylinders. Cylinders actually come in two sizes, and I probably didn't mention this at the beginning. They're either large or small, okay? There's no medium. They're either large or small. From AA to E, small. Anything above E, that's your F and on up, those are your large cylinders, okay? And the large ones are the ones that have the spring-loaded safety release on them. So the CGA has come out with a system. When you look at the regulators, you look at the reducing valves, you will see that they're all a little bit different. They also have the number on them that tell you this is a CGA, blah, 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 blah. And it'll also tell you the threads, internal, external, right-handed, left-handed. All of that information is on there. So if you want to read it, you can sit down and read it and find out what is that CGA attachment, okay? Two major ones that we're going to talk about, these are for the high pressure, okay? These are for 2000 PSI or above, is your ASSS, American Standard Safety System. This is for the large cylinders. The Pin Index Safety System, or PISS, is for the small cylinders. But all of them, the CGA regulators, reducing valves, all have a specific number that goes with the gas. Anyways, you can see the threads. You can see these are external threads, and you see the other one you can't see really well, but the internal threads, two different ones, and there is no way to interchange them unless you actually make changes to the valve stems. They are what they are. And then the Pin Index Safety System, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, as you can see it is. Oxygen is 2 and 5. 2 and 5 is oxygen. Oxygen is 2 and 5. Medical air is 1 and 5. 1 and 5 is medical air. And you can see how there's a slight dip from that 1 to that 5, okay? We have the valve stems for aluminum cylinders are aluminum, okay? In some cases, well, actually the regulators, the valve stems are still brass, but the regulators reducing valves are actually aluminum. What has happened is that the pin index safety system, when we put those on in the pin and yoke system, there's actually a little washer, and they've gotten better, but back in the day, even a couple of years ago, there was a little washer that went on the regulator reducing valve, and this washer had to be changed. There was the little ones that had to be changed every time. There were some that had some, like a little rubber portion in the middle, and they could last a lot longer. And what would happen is people would have an empty cylinder. They would take the regulator off or the reducing valve off, mainly the regulators, and they would go ahead and not take the washer. And then, of course, the washer would leak. And so what they would do is they would tighten down the regulator or the reducing valve on the pin index safety system. And unfortunately, what happens when you do that after a while, because it's aluminum, it'll start to bend. And once it bends, once you turn it on, now you have an explosion. So if you're around any of these aluminum regulators or reducing valves, be careful how they're tightened. If you see those things being over tightened, back away, take them off if you can do that or something like that. But be extremely careful with them because, like I said, they can bend, and if they do, you do have an explosion at that particular point. And this just shows you how they line up. This is really what they look like, just like that, okay? And you can see the washer on here. Let me see if I get my highlighter. Here's my highlighter. Here's my pen. Okay. Here's your gasket. You can see this gasket right here. It's got a rubber in the portion of it. And that rubber, it could be used for several changes of this regulator. This, if this is a regulator reducing valve, I don't know because we don't have the rest of it. But at this point, this is what we're looking at. Here's the handle. This little handle, if we over tighten it, this is what causes the aluminum ones to bend. You can see over here, here's your 2 and 5. This is what you would see on your cylinder. Air 1 and 5, this is what you would see. And you can see they're not opposite each other. There's a little bit of a dip here. And so that tells you that. And then here's some of the other gases too. So this is just showing you the ASS and PISS connections. You also see on there, there's this thing called DISS, okay? And DISS is Diameter Index Safety System. This is for low pressures, anything less than 200 PSI. The disconnections are for our equipment, okay? When we're connecting anything to the cylinder, if we're connecting anything to the station outlet, there are disconnectors. So why do we have those disconnectors? So that we can hook our cylinders, our equipment to whatever we need to at that particular point, okay? Otherwise, you're not going to be able to hook your equipment up at that point. If you notice with the cylinder here, it says a GH cylinder. We have GH, HK, we have different ones. Nothing is going to change except the letters, so don't worry too much about those at this point. Both of these, this and this, these are called regulators. The reason we call them regulators is because they have what we call a reducing valve. This is your reducing valve. You've got 2200 PSI in here. If you remember, our working pressure is 50 PSI. So somewhere between here and here, this pressure has to go from 2200 or whatever's in that cylinder down to 50 PSI at this point. So this is the reducing valve. This is what reduces that pressure to the working pressure. And then you have a flow meter, and the flow meter here, this is called a Thorpe tube. We're going to talk about this when we talk about regulators and reducing valves. This is most of these in the hospital are called compensated Thorpe tubes, and we'll talk about that. Why do we want those? It's because we know what we're delivering to the patient, okay? The other flow meter that we have that we'll talk about is the board-on gauge. These are board-on gauges. Why are they board-on gauges? Board-on gauges are anything that are round, okay? So it's a reducing valve. It's also a board-on gauge, but it's a reducing valve when we ask for it to put on our equipment. These are little labels. Sometimes you won't see these in the hospital anymore. People got very, very lazy. They wouldn't put them on. People would pull them off because they didn't know what to do with them. If you were in the vet program, you'd find out they're very, very good about these. They use these all the time, okay? So how do you protect yourself? You know, roll the cylinder. It has to have a cart, okay? It has to be rolled in the cart. And you can't throw it over your shoulder and you can't kick it along the floor or roll them. I would love to tell you that you're always going to see cylinders in the carts or approved stands where we can put these cylinders. I can't tell you the number of times we saw them laying on the floor or laying on top of a cart on top of all the other cylinders. You gotta make sure you watch that. That is not safe at all. So you always have to watch those cylinders. Be aware of what's going on around you with them too. The other thing too, when you're moving them, you should have the regulator reducing valve not on them. The cap still should be on. You have to close the valve after using the cylinder. Unfortunately, that does not happen that often, so always be aware of that. Don't bounce them off each other. People like to do that for some reason. I think they like the little bell sound with them. So, you know, just be careful with them. The cylinders, are a little bit more dangerous than a lot of people um, realize. And unfortunately, it's not until somebody gets hurt or something else happens that they go, oh, I didn't know that. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that that's what was happening. When you go into some of the labs and some of the PFT labs, you notice that there's not the carts holding the cylinders, but there's a board on the wall with chains on it. As long as the cylinders are behind that chain and those chains are connected and actually secured, then those cylinders are secured for you. So you want them in a nice, cool, drying flame resistant area. The flammable gases have to be away from the oxygen for some reason. I'm not quite sure why. Empty and full cylinders. It is a trip sometimes. You're sometimes looking for a cylinder to take a patient somewhere. And you can't find them. All of them are empty, and you're like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this. And so sometimes you have to do like a room-to-room search to find those cylinders. So, be aware of that. And then don't smoke around them. In case you're wondering, this is what happened when some gas exploded. There were some cylinders. It shut down the highway. There's a really cool story if you ever have an opportunity to go look for it. There was a 6-lane highway in Texas, and these people found a cylinder in the junkyard, and they took it to their bud and said, hey, can you fill this? And their buddy, who should never have done it, did it, but all the gas leaked out because the safety system had blown off of it. And so they went ahead and welded it back on and brought it back, and he filled it again. And these two guys are driving around this 6-lane highway, and they stopped for some reason, which was really cool. And the cylinder exploded, sent one of them 150 feet down the road, took off and went across all 6 lanes, across a grassy field, excuse me, and into this apartment. Guess what? You go home and you got a cylinder in your apartment that blew up your kitchen. One of the students we had couple of classes back, about 3 or 4 classes back, was actually in Texas at the time that happened. She said it was kind of interesting to see what happened with it. And this is a gentleman, probably won't talk to you, but he's going to tell you that things blew up. Oh, yes, you can. So you should be able to click on it. So how do we go ahead and manage this? Because this is something you as a student / respiratory therapist are going to have to do. Sometimes what happens, we'll talk about this with the piping system too, is that they'll take the piping system down for maintenance. When they do, you got to put your patients on cylinders as a backup. So you need to have how to deal with them too. First of all, like I said, you have to find the correct cylinder. Remember, you're going to read the label. Do not rely on the color. Second, secure it. You just can't hold it between your knees and decide to try to put something on it. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. Remove your protective cap. Do you want any dust or debris? If you do, you're going to have a problem because if you turn it on, you can explode the cylinder. And you want to make sure it's not pointing at anyone. If you see someone walking down the hallway and they go, can I watch? Can I watch? I can stand in front of it. You might want to tell them you need to move. There's 2200 PSI coming out of this. It's interesting, sometime in the lab when we would turn this on, we would turn them around and face the blinds. We had blinds at that point, and people would do their cracking the cylinder, which is on the next slide. I'm going to show it to you, and the blinds would go whoosh, and all the dust would fly all over the room. And students would go, is that how you dust this place? And I told them, yeah, that was the best way to do it. So it really sent the blinds flying. So it really, there's quite a bit of pressure behind 2200 PSI. And then what you do is announce very loudly, cracking the cylinder, because you want people to know that they shouldn't be standing in front of it. Now, cracking doesn't mean that I'm going to turn it on and, go, hey, this is really cool. Look at all the gas coming out. It's a very quick on and off. Okay, and the reason we do that is to make sure that if there was any dust or debris, we're not putting it any further into the regulator reducing valve. We're actually going to blow it out of there. So that's the reason why you do it. Okay, it's not bleeding the cylinder, it's just doing that part of it. Okay, what happened here? So the next one then, after you do this, you're going to attach your regulator or reducing valve. People will tell you righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, this is turning it on, turning it off. When you turn it on, as you can see, it's slowly like a quarter to a half a turn. It's just like your gas cap. If you read the little label in the gas cap, it tells you open it slowly. That way you don't have that pressure that's going to cause it to blow out. And the same with the cylinder, we're going to do the same thing. Once you've done that, you're going to open up fully, and then you go ahead and turn it back. When you turn it back, this prevents valve freeze. It was probably about the second lab that I was running. We had a cylinder of air. They had been using it. They closed it. And when they closed it, it didn't close. And as a result of that, we lost all of the gas in it, which is not a problem because fortunately nobody was hurt. So anyways, something like that can happen. You have to be careful with it. This is the safety system. This is your DISS. You have both quick disc and then you have regular disc. Quick disc is what you see here. You can push that little button and it'll plop the flow meter out. Some cases they have like a little turn and you just turn it and it pops the flow meter out. Regular disc or plain disc, if you want to call it that, is what you saw in the lab when you were in the lab. If you looked at the beds and you saw the headboards had the flow meters in there. What you do is you have to screw them in, okay? And then you have, if you want them out, you have to unscrew them to take them out. This is what you need to know with the quick disc too, and especially the quick disc. When you put that flow meter in, do not take your hand off it until you hear it click in. If you just put it in part way and let it go, it's going to bounce back at you. You just released 50 psi, okay? And you don't want that thing flying at you or at your patients. The same when you take it out, you're going to go ahead and hold it until you get it out. You have your hand on it and you'll feel it release, and when you do, you go ahead and take it out, okay? Now, an MBRC question is basically this. You just went ahead and released the disc, you took it out, and now you got 50 psi coming out of the disc, okay? What are you going to do? And the answer is put the flow meter back in. The flow meter will stop it. What the problem is the valve seat in the disc is not any good anymore. And you don't repair that. That's part of biomed. That's what their job is. So you make sure that you tag this and tell them that they need to come up and fix it, okay? So that's one of the really good questions. Another question they'll ask you when we talk about flow meters is the flow meter's turned off and it still has gas coming out. In this case, the valve seat is in the flow meter, not in the disc, okay? So just remember that. If you see 50 psi coming out, just put that flow meter back in. For some reasons, patients get a little concerned when there's 50 psi blowing out of the disc holder and they're in the room. And these are all different types of discs that you can see at this particular point. Guess what green is for? And then guess what yellow is for? The nice thing is we like to color code everything, and we like to put names on everything. With these are little pipelines at this point. If you see this is blue, up here would be the name of this. And what's blue? You guys know what that is. Yeah, it's part of your homework. This is your yellow. This would tell you medical air. Over here, this is going to tell you oxygen, okay? This is going to tell you oxygen too. So, you know, it's one of those things that everything is color-coded and has a name on it. Now, one of the things you'll see are the little bit of Christmas trees. The little bitty Christmas trees are where we sometimes put our nasal cannula and our small bore tubing. The requirement now is they either be black or white or clear or whatever, because unfortunately we used to put the yellow ones on the green and put the green ones on the yellow or whatever colors we happen to have just to put it on there. And then people would go in there and they would see a green Christmas tree and they would hook up the patient to it, and then you'd walk in and go, why is the patient on medical air? Well, the Christmas tree is green, therefore it has to be oxygen. I have to tell you, the Christmas tree is a piece of plastic. It is not magical. It does not change medical air to oxygen. Okay, so in order to make things much, much better, now we're color coding everything and trying to follow through with it. So this is what we're going to talk about with the next one. How long do cylinders last? Um, Basically, you have either liquid or gas. Gas, when we use these cylinders, we see the pressure drop. We know what's in that cylinder. When you have liquid, if we read the gauges are never going to drop until the liquid is gone and the last remnants of the gas is gone also. So the only way to find out what's remaining in the liquid cylinder is you have to weigh it. We're going to weigh the weight of the gas, okay? So there's two different things we do. With gas, we can read the PSI. With liquid, we have to weigh the cylinder. And this is what we just talked about. As you can see, there was your max PSI in this case. The cylinder was full at this particular point. As you used it, if you notice, the gauge is going down, continues to go down. This is about halfway. And then you get to the back part, last one. Now you're down. And if this ward was in the hospital, this would say 500 psi, and that's where you would stop using this cylinder. The liquid one, if you notice, it doesn't move until never. If these molecules left, then this would drop. What's happening is the molecules are going in and out of the liquid, and as they go in and out of that liquid, they are still exerting the same pressure. That's the reason why you have to weigh the liquid cylinders.